Hello and welcome to this webinar on Annex 1. I'm Lynne Byers and I'm the Senior Vice President in NSF Health Sciences, responsible for pharmaceutical biotech consultancy and training. Annex 1 is a very important annex. This revision started a long time ago, back in 2015, updating the current version that was published in 2008. Now, that version was only 16 pages long, and even that took a few years to come to fruition. If you look at the current version, the final draft was version 12, and that was issued in 2017, and that was 50 pages long. And then finally, the final version was 59 pages long. What's quite interesting about this is that it was a joint project between the EU, the PICS, the World Health Organization, and the US FDA. There's lots more detail in it, but what's really very important for industry as a whole is that effectively it's harmonizing the requirements of many different regulators worldwide. In fact, I was talking to a client yesterday, and they told me they'd had recently a WHO inspection. And what surprised them was they were directly quoting from Annex 1. And they were expecting companies to start to comply with Annex 1. So again, it just reiterates how important this is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the changes, or effectively the rumours of changes, and really assess, are there really changes or not? So the first rumour, if you like, that does it mandate the use of Annex 1 to non-sterile products? Well, no, it doesn't. If you look at the definitions within the scope, it very clearly states that this annex can be useful to use the principles and guidance for contamination control strategy, the design of premises, the clean room classifications, qualifications, validation, and so on, may be used to support the manufacture of other products that are not intended to be sterile, but it's not mandated. So please consider, use quality risk management principles and decide what makes sense for your products if they're non-sterile products and what does not. The second, again, linking into quality risk management. So the principles of quality risk management are included in this annex, and quality risk management was not previously included. If you think back to when the previous version of Annex 1 was implemented, it was prior to ICHQ 9 being brought into the regulations within the EU. But clearly, quality risk management is not new. It's true that quality risk management principles are now a very clear expectation within Annex 1, but it's not new. Those principles have been around for quite a long time, so it's very important that companies realise that QRM is not new. And indeed, many companies are already using quality risk management and risk assessments as they're going through the different stages of aspects to do with manufacturing sterile products. Quality risk management is not new. It's often a common deficiency from inspections. Inspectors often think that companies have an idea of what is low risk and therefore will always define whatever potential risks there may be as low in severity or very low in occurrence. Quality risk management is fundamental to medicinal products, and it's very important that anyone taking part in quality risk management assessments actually understand the processes and the products. And being averse to risk can be just as detrimental to patients. Don't forget, one size does not fit all, and it's important that you have the right people participating in quality risk management assessments. Don't forget the people that actually do the work. They know the details that may not always be written down. So, principles of contamination control strategy. This is an area that's caused most angst among the pharmaceutical industry. Is this new? Well, it is new, but it's newish. So the principles of the contamination control strategy have been scattered across the Good Manufacturing Practice GMPs for many years. Most of the elements within the CCS are not new. But what is new is the expectation that this will be pulled together in a comprehensive strategy. Many clients have come to us to ask for help and advice in how to manage this aspect. There are two main ways to tackle this. One is to perhaps bring everything together into one document. That may be okay if you're a very small organisation, but if you're a very large organisation with multiple production lines, multiple products, it probably is not sensible. You need to first, when you're writing a contamination control strategy, is to consider, well, what are the requirements? What are you manufacturing? Are you manufacturing drug substance? Are you manufacturing drug product? What types of dose forms do you have? Do you have lyophilized products? Do you have liquid products? What is it? So our NSF's advice is that you should always think about, well, what are the standards that apply to our products? And then consider what are the requirements, and then start to look at what you already have. I'm sure if you already are established, you will have an environmental monitoring strategy and a definition of what the sampling points. That's something that needs to be pulled into your contamination control strategy. Again, you can cross-reference to it. You don't need to include everything within the CCS, but it's important that you consider all the elements that are listed in the CCS. You also need to consider how to organise it. If you're a big site with multiple product streams, perhaps, you may have some elements that will be common, perhaps incoming materials will be something that will be common. But once you get into the definition of the manufacturing process for a particular product, you may have just that particular production operation included in the CCS. So, as I've said already, the individual elements are not new, but the overall approach is probably new. The minimum to be included are detailed in Annex 1. So, pulling together the assessment, remember that quality risk management process, the risk assessments are important. Look at the interaction with other activities, such as your environmental monitoring program, smoke studies, and so on. But then what can be quite difficult is, well, how do you make it as useful as possible and usable? So how do you make sure that whenever you're looking at change controls, that it's included in that assessment? How do you know when to perhaps reassess your strategy? What signals, what metrics are you going to use to tell you that maybe something's not quite right and you need to go back and look at your contamination control strategy? So figuring all this out is quite challenging. Obviously, we can be here to help you, but you need to decide yourself. There isn't an aid memoir that tells you exactly how to do it. You need to figure out how it works best for you as a company and how it can fit in best within your own systems that you already have. Talking about systems, another rumour is, well, do I now need a new pharmaceutical quality system just for my sterile products? Well, that is not true. It is a very complex activity to manufacture sterile products, and you obviously need some very specific controls and measures, but there is not an expectation that you have a new PQS for sterile products. So please don't forget, go back to the basics, go back to Chapter 1 of the EU GMPs if you're working within Europe or supplying to the European market, and double check that everything's working and make sure that there are good links between the contamination control strategy that I've just talked about and the PQS. As I've already said, some of the key elements looking at the PQS would be an effective risk management system. It is a good opportunity as you're pulling together the CCS to actually make sure that the assessments that have been made are up to date, make sure if there's any new information that where you might want to change the risk assessments, it's a good time to do that. Make sure that there is sufficient knowledge and expertise in the people that are working through the different elements of the PQS. Root cause assessments and CAPAs, the corrective and preventive actions, again, they should be built into the risk assessments, and also if you come out of the contamination control strategy with actions that need to be tracked, then the best place to do that is probably through your CAPA system. Senior managers, if you look at ICHQ 10, senior managers have critical roles to play. They need oversight, but the senior managers perhaps can't look at all the details. So how do you best communicate to senior managers about what they need to do and what role they play within the PQS? And then if you're supplying products into the EU or the UK, then qualified persons who are responsible for the batch certification must have access to the manufacturing and quality information. And specifically, this is quite useful in section 3.2. It gives very clear expectations of what should be made available. For example, sterility test failures, environmental monitoring excursions, and deviations. These are not new for most companies, but I think to have it written down and a clear expectation, that's quite helpful for companies and also the QPs or the responsible persons across the world who are responsible for certifying batches. So, premises, is it true that RABs are restricted access barrier systems or isolators? Is it true that they're now mandated? Well, no, that's not true. But, and it is a big but, if you're not using RABs or isolators, so the benefits of using a restricted access barrier system or isolators is that it minimizes the potential for contamination from humans into the products. If you don't have that, then any alternative approach needs to be justified. Looking at premises, again, most of the things that are included have already been expectations, but it's now in black and white, and therefore it's clear. And it's clear when you're designing processes and equipment and facilities such that you make sure that you comply with these. So 4.11 talks about the unidirectional process for the transfer of materials and equipment and components into grade A and B areas. And then 4.12, again, this can be quite difficult to comply with. So if you have a facility whereby maybe you have one changing room going into a grade B area, so now there's an expectation or that it's desirable that you have different changing rooms for entering and then leaving areas. Again, we can all acknowledge that that's a good practice, but if you don't have that set up at the moment, then to figure out how to implement that will be quite challenging. Again, it comes into having a good quality risk assessment process. Smoke studies should be recorded, so videoed, and properly annotated so that whoever's looking at the smoke studies later can also see exactly what is happening within the smoke study. And all of this, the premises requirements, all ties into the environmental monitoring programme. Open and closed isolators. Again, there are some clear guidance on different requirements for open and closed isolators. And again, this is very useful when you're specifying your expectations for new equipment as you're bringing it into the facilities. Premises, biodecontamination of isolators. We've all seen isolators, they've been great, but actually, if you think about how do you clean them, how do you biodecontaminate them, it's actually quite difficult because they have lots of different surfaces. Ideally, they should be automated, validated, and controlled. So important that you really consider how you're going to biodecontaminate isolators as you're bringing them into your facilities. And it's very difficult to retrofit biodecontamination services. And then the big debate about whether to monitor 5-micron particles or greater. It depends. It depends on the risk assessments that you're doing, and the contamination control strategy should actually drive that decision. And then sampling locations should be assessed and documented. Again, it comes back to risk assessments and having some data as you are bringing in facilities and equipment, such that you understand which are the most difficult to reach sampling locations, to make sure that you can continue to check those and make sure you haven't got any surfaces which are not decontaminated. So, equipment. For aseptics, I now need to sterilize indirect product contact parts. Well, question I would say is, well, yes, that's true, but surely you've been doing that already. Indirect product contact parts have long been autoclaved or ethylene oxide sterilized. So nothing new, again, just putting more detail into the guidance document such that you know exactly what needs to be done. Clearly, indirect product contact parts can contaminate an area where the product is being manufactured. So please read the details. Personnel. Aseptic operators now need to wear goggles and facility socks. Well, that is true. What Section 7 has in the Annex 1 is more detail on training requirements and garment maximum times. I'm sure many companies and many people have spent many hours debating how to train their staff, how long garments should be worn, do they need to be fresh garments for every filling period? If people go for breaks, is it necessary? But now you do have the detail within the document. So again, take it as helpful information and follow it. And then we come on to the chapter 8 of the Annex, where it starts to talk about production and specific technologies. So aseptic hold times, room classification for capping activities. I remember when the previous version of Annex 1 was issued, there was a long debate about whether it was necessary to have grade A before particularly vials were capped. And again, that was something that was an expectation, but created lots of discussion at the time. Form fill seal is new, again, and blow fill seal has been expanded. These are not such new technologies now, but it's helpful to have good information about them. Lyophilization, as products that are coming through the pipeline have moved into more biotechnology products, then lyophilization has become much more mainstream, and therefore that part of the Annex has been vastly expanded. One thing to note is that Section 8.123 has an extended implementation to August 2024, and that's a recognition that it's maybe fairly difficult for some companies to implement that. And again, a big change that we've seen in the last 10 years has been the use of single-use systems. So there's much more information about single-use systems in the Annex. So, question, have you seen the new requirement around integrity testing? Well, is that new? Well, no, it's not. It's not new. Integrity testing, so filter integrity testing before or after use, is not particularly new. Production and specific technologies. So the biggest area for debate is PUPSIT, So this is pre-use, post-sterilization integrity testing. That's not a new requirement, but it is quite difficult depending on the setup, whether you can actually do that. So what is helpful is that it includes details of what to do if PUPSIT is impossible. And just as some information, this will be an area of focus for many inspectors as they go through and do inspections against Annex 1. And also product-specific risk assessments. Let's really think about, well, what do you need to do to make sure that a specific product meets the requirements of Annex 1? Viable and non-viable environmental monitoring. So this has been significantly expanded and clarified. There's an assessment of the design of the EM program. Again, good companies will always have used risk assessments and data that they have to make sure that their environmental monitoring program is designed to look in areas where you may find problems. There's lots of information on the monitoring of personnel. There are limits for grade A no growth, and any growth in a grade A requires investigation. And also an expectation to consider non-viable and viable monitoring together, because they're both providing different types of information, but should be brought together to help make the right decisions. Aseptic process simulations, media fills as they used to be called, significantly expanded and clarified. The number of units to be filled, it's very clear now. It's also very clear around what the acceptance or reject figures would be. Any contamination that is found in an aseptic process simulation needs to be investigated fully. So what do I need to do, and what do the regulators expect? Well, you need to look at your current systems and processes against the new Annex. Don't just use it as a tick list. Try and look at it holistically. You will have some gaps. Almost every company will have some gaps. And plan how to address those gaps. Don't just try and justify or risk assess away a non-compliance. The regulators have got lots of experience. They're used to going into many companies. Most of them have worked in this sort of area before. So they understand. What they don't like is if you start to say that something is low risk, but they do not expect you to justify non-compliance. Obviously, you need to meet the deadlines, and August 2023 is now. And please get help if you need it. So what will the regulators want to see? They won't expect anything in the new Annex to be in place, although we have heard from clients that sometimes some of the regulators have started to inspect against it. They absolutely will expect you to be aware of the changes and have a plan of where you need to get to. Most of Annex 1 is becoming live in August 2023, but there is one area where it's extended to 2024 for implementation. So make sure that you're following the new Annex, that people are trained, that you have done a gap analysis, and that you have plans in place. There's no justification for being late. This has been a long time coming, and so regulators might get somewhat frustrated if companies are ignorant of what the requirements are. They expect you to know and to stay on top of what the regulations are saying. So here's the link to the Annex. I'm sure you've all read it. As I say, look at it in the whole. Don't forget the rest of the EU GMPs. This does not stand alone for the products you need to consider, particularly Chapter 1, talking about the pharmaceutical quality system. And I'd just like to thank you for joining this webinar. Hope you've enjoyed it, hope you've learnt something, and we'd be happy to help you if you need anything. And here are our contact details. Thank you very much.